Oh, yeah, thank you. I was just talking to my wife today, thinking about just finally cutting it off because, yeah, I kind of grew this out during
Yeah.
the height of the pandemic, and I can actually go get a haircut now.
Ethan's big day out.
Hey, welcome. If you listened to episode 184 with Jason Copeland, his magnum opus Full Tilt went live on Zoom, I guess last week, and did great day one. He made funding and then some. I think everyone should check this book out because I think it's going to be fantastic. I think it's going to be the action adventure we all need. That's what it feels like. More power to Jason and congratulations to him. I've also completed the draft of the book, so the revision is done, and by the time this airs, I will have gone to and returned from the Nebula conference in Anaheim, which is the annual SIFWA convention, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's my first foray into the writer's world in this fashion. Done plenty of comic conventions for the last 30 plus years, but this is a very different animal, at least internally for me. I don't think there's going to be people sitting at tables with, banners and that such around. I think this is a much more talk and listen kind of place. So we'll see. I mean, I could be completely wrong. I'm looking forward to every aspect of it. Yeah. So hey, let's get right into it. This week's guest is Ethan Young. Turns out we had a lot more in common than I had ever thought. It was great as the conversation unfurled. All these little things would pop up. He is unabashedly himself, which I think is fantastic, and has strong beliefs about comics and his work and the industry, which I don't think is something we should shy away from. I think we should all be really, honest about things regarding how we sort of frame ourselves within the business. And he's a fantastic talent and a really, really good person to talk with. Yeah, this is me and Ethan Young.
I'm in Ithaca, New York, where Cornell is.
Oh, okay. Awesome. I went to art school in New York City, but my girlfriend went to Wells.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right in Aurora.
20 minutes up the road, I guess, something like that.
Yeah, the town is so quiet. I actually did a little college talk there not too long ago, and yeah, the students are really, I don't know if reclusive is the right word. I think they're just very they're very quiet, they're very posed, they're very poised, and they're not exactly like extroverted.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're shy as like toddler, as like when I've talked to like some grade schoolers before. They're very incredibly shy and reserved with a lot of their emotions. I think part of it could also be because they're like the generation that kind of missed out on a lot of socializing in high school because of COVID. So that could have been a huge.
So this is a recent talk.
Yeah, this was only like sometime last year. I think. Yeah, it was just Wells does this like writer series where they just invite authors to come and talk to like people, and then like the I'm friends with the organizer and one of the professors there, and he kind of warned me that the students will be quiet and there also won't be a lot of them just because of the size of the university itself.
I don't even think it's a university. I think it's still a college. It's tiny.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Doing the talk there, sometimes it feels like, if I know if I'm at like a New York Comic Con or something, giving a panel, if I know the audience is there specifically just to hear about the content that I make, or they're very interested in the subject matter or the themes that I explore, then it becomes a much more comfortable conversation because I know that I'm speaking, I'm preaching to the choir. With these students, I think they were just kind of like, well, come here for extra credit. I think some people at the time when I went there, I was still working for Marvel Disney. So I think there was that slight excitement about that like I worked for this giant corporation that makes 50% of the content we all consume now. So I think that was it.
I mean, yeah, maybe you had a magic wand for all they knew, I mean, it's possible. Yeah, that's so interesting. I went to see Oh, wait, I've started going to say a jazz musician's name, and that's not the. I went to go see Ta-Nehisi Coates talk. So Ta-Nehisi, yeah. So he
Oh, okay.
wrote that great Black Panther run. So he was speaking here at the local university, and I went, and it was sold out. But a buddy of mine is in the um, media, so he got passes. He's like, let's go. So we went, and it's in the basketball arena, so like huge space. And we were like, oh my gosh, like parking was impossible, but they didn't fill it up. And what we realized, I think the student body was given tickets to go. And on the floor where the seating, and a lot of the students are down there. And I just remember seeing like the basketball team all just sitting there with their arms crossed for the hour and a half of him talking, because they just didn't want to be there. They were, 19 years old and had other things going on in their head.
Yeah, I find that when you find a student who's really interested, and also like on top of that, like interested in exploring like creative endeavors themselves, then the conversation becomes much more stimulating for them, and it becomes more rewarding for me, just because I feel like I'm not just throwing out like anecdotes to try to fill space. I'm actually kind of imparting some information that could be helpful for this young person's career. Hopefully I can steer them away from becoming a comic book artist, because that's not the most rewarding life.
No,
I'm kidding.
I mean, it's the thing, like, man, like everybody who like, I mean, we've all heard it. Like you're doing it because you love it. Like there's this,
Mm-hmm.
there's this ability to express a story in comic books that's very different than other, medias. So the idea, and especially if you are a person who draws and writes, like this ability to kind of tell a story in this amazing fashion, which is so immediate, but not completely passive. So it forces engagement, and it forces engagement on multiple levels, which I think is very different than most film or television type of storytelling. And it's not to say that you can't get more out of those ones, but you can just sit there and let it happen.
Yeah. When I first started working for Disney, I didn't realize like I'm not working there anymore. I was a character designer on Spider-Man freshman year. And now that I've left the show, or I'm kind of on a hiatus, I can kind of like say that. It's at the time, it was like a breath of fresh air. I just wrapped up a big graphic novel for Scholastic. That wasn't it wasn't something I owned, and so the process of making it was it was just very corporate, very by the numbers, and I'm treated well at the publishers. It's just a matter of like fulfillment. Personal fulfillment. And so when I went over to Disney, I was like, all right, well, now I'll get paid, and now I'll have like a set schedule, a set paycheck, so I don't have to hustle as much from like a freelance perspective. But yeah, like over time, it's just like you said, it's something you do because you love, and for better or worse, people who grow up with it, they tend to develop this it's almost like our nervous systems are connected to this art form, and like we almost like have to have it just so our brains can function properly, because it is a maddening field in terms of like I mean, the corporate side of how little you're paid, and then there's also just the tedious nature of the work, because especially nowadays, like people they expect a lot more out of the same amount of time you have to draw something. So yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate that I've had a pretty decent career over the past couple of years. I'm very fortunate that people seem to like my commissions, and hopefully I'll still get to do them.
Let's kind of hop into the commissions, because it is an interesting aspect, and I talk about commissions a lot with people, because when I was in the business in the 90s, commissions really weren't that big of a thing. They were much more of a rarefied event, and and I've said it before, and Adam Hughes is the kind of guy who paved the way for the modern commission experience. There was this real heavy need I say need, but desire to get his work. And he just kept having to raise the price, or he wouldn't have been able to do anything because it was just too much request. And now we have sort of this whole, I don't know, it's almost like, private commission portraits being done for people, getting exactly what they want by the artist that they love, for a piece. And it's an amazing thing. And the majority of us are deprived of this artwork because we can't go to the store and pick it up off the shelf. And I go, so much talent is being, sort of sequestered away. But you share your process of creating your pieces, which is really great because you get to see that sort of that early stage in your development. And what I'm totally interested in asking is, when I look at your work, I go, he's channeling what are clearly the main influences of that subject. So someone was like, I think you did like that sort of Mark Silvestri era's X-Men piece. And it really had all that vibe of that whole Outback run of the X-Men. But your style is still strongly imprinted in it, but you were able to infuse all these other elements. And then I see that with so many other pieces you do. And I think that's a really amazing kind of gift that you're able to kind of give the person who's asking for what they really, truly, truly love, and fuse it with what you do.
You can continue saying nice things about me. I enjoy this part.
Yeah, sure. I'll just go through the list now. Is this a conscious effort on your half when you're like sitting down to say, hey, I really want to give the person what I know that they're going to love in the terms of like the subject matter? Or are you going, I love this so much, I have to like kind of bring it out too?
It's a little bit of both. I think I'm fortunate enough that like I think my style appeals just because within comic books, and I think that this is also true of some other mediums and genres like horror or sci-fi, especially back in the day before it was more mainstream, that like because you're dealing with things that are a little bit outside the mainstream, fans feel like a personal ownership of a lot of it. So I think that like, so you have creators who are fans and you have fans who are really connected to those creators, sometimes maybe on like a parasocial level that isn't always healthy, but I'm lucky enough to have buyers and fans and readers who not only like my work, but like the stuff that I've been influenced by. So I think that like when I open commission lists, I get a plethora of stuff, but like I also get a large number of commissions of stuff that I really love, like 90s X-Men stuff, or just my favorite artist of all time is like Art Adams, and so like if I get a chance to draw like his style of Wolverine, that's great, and everyone is kind of happy. And like you mentioned about me sharing my process. There's a little bit of like personal gain from that, just because I learned a while back just to kind of like game the algorithm a little bit by like showing the process and showing stuff that's actually not completed tends to bring in a certain kind of like voyeuristic follower. It might not always translate to dollars, but unfortunately, being an artist nowadays, being a cartoonist or illustrator, you also have to be like this cottage industry, and you have to kind of, especially your own social media manager, your own department store head or whatever. Like, it's just there's all these little elements always flying around, and so I learned that like, I'll just consistently post this never-ending like incessant content that just like bombards people. Like, I also kind of at first I was really self-conscious about it because like I didn't want to like annoy people, and I think that's like that's like something that a lot of creators are aware of, that like, well, how much should I post? Am I annoying my followers? Because some of this content can feel redundant after a while. But I realized that like, well, if I post something and only like 15% of my followers see it, there's no reason why I shouldn't post something similar down the road simply because I'm worried about some kind of like, hypothetical criticism about it.
Yeah, that sounds a bit granular in a sense of concern, because also people who are interested in what you do probably will be more joyful to see what you do rather than to not.
Yeah.
And it's that strange, social media kind of phenomena that we have this sense that we have a greater sense of connection to these people who we're attached to via social media. And I'm even talking friends. Like, we have friends in social media, and that we feel that we are involved with their day-to-day life, even though we're not. We're just observing these small snapshots of whatever it is.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned you went to SVA?
I went to SVA from 87 to 91.
Oh, okay. I went there 1 year, or 1 year, 01 to 02. And then I'm still on spring break.
They may not even have noticed yet. So you just keep, you can come back whenever you want. Was that your first foray going off into school, or did you switch over to SVA, or what was the?
I had graduated from high school. I went to LaGuardia in New York City.
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course, man.
And like I was lucky enough to get like a ton of formal training there for not only classical skills but like technical skills. Because are you from New York City by any chance?
No, I just lived there for 25 years. So.
Right. But like, I'm pretty sure you've kind of heard of LaGuardia. Like, it's especially for a high school, they can be really intensive in some of their training for whether it's music or art. And like, I had teachers that were really kind of hard on us while we were like juniors, while we were only like 17. Like, I remember I took an advertising class junior year, and this teacher, I still remember his name because he was really instructional. Like, he was a great artist, and he, there was always these rumors going around about him, about just how mean he was, how hard he was. But really, he told us like very early on that like he's going to treat us the same way an art director or an editor is going to treat us, because you're not going to get paid for a job if you don't hand it in. It doesn't matter if you were sick or not. And like, it's that kind of reality can come crashing down on a 16-year-old psyche. But like, it really did kind of like, I think, forge a lot of us to kind of be prepared for a much tougher freelance experience going forward. And I mean, he was hard, but he was also, if you did good work, he would be very complimentary. If you did bad work, he would kind of burn you a little bit, which was, right. I wouldn't do that if I was an instructor, but that's me.
Well, so one of my favorite instructors at SVA was Joe Orlando. And
okay.
So Joe got that kind of, I don't know, the reputation for, the students as they would move up, when you got the option to take his class. And a lot of people didn't because, I hear he's really hard on people. And I was like, isn't that the reason we're here? So he took the class, and Joe's class was a great concept of a class. But what you would do every beginning of class each week, you'd pin up your work on the wall. And Joe would just walk down the line and just go saleable, not saleable, just straight through. Like, he wouldn't stop. He would describe anything. He wouldn't say good, bad, indifferent, just straight on through. If this is something that you could sell or not. And it was crushing. And if you had the guts, you would say, hey, why isn't it sellable? If you think you put the effort in, like, I mean, I think if listen, we've all phoned stuff in, so you're not going to raise your hand at that point. But if you tried, he would, but he would be honest and straightforward. He would never rip you. He would just go, this isn't working. Your composition's off. You're not telling a story, whatever the thing was. And it was a really smart way of doing it because it wasn't wasting anybody's time. For the people who wanted to get better, they were going to make the effort. The people who didn't, wouldn't. And that was how it went. So, yeah, I mean, I applaud your teacher.
Yeah. I have found that too. Like I've met, I'm trying to say this diplomatically too, because I don't think that money should always be the indicator of success, but if we could be blunt about it, like I've met a lot of talented people who like didn't really go the distance, whether it be illustration or cartooning or comics, just because like no one can teach you work ethic. Now, obviously, there's other factors that factor into it, whether it's mental health, whether it's your financial situation, but like, but at the same time, it's just like we all have a ceiling to hit, and like it's our personal responsibility to hit that ceiling. Because like no teacher is going to be able to like can't teach you to be like, oh, be obsessive about this anatomy book and learn anatomy at every single angle. Like I get a lot of young artists now who, when they see my stuff, they ask me like, oh, what models did you use? What reference did you use? And I'm like, my brain, that's it. Like I obsessively studied anatomy because I had a much older brother growing up who also wanted to be an artist. And we were like hyper competitive. He was 9 years older than me, but we were still just neck and neck, just like competitive with each other. So I was like, this guy had 9 years on me. And as a kid, I was like, I'm going to be better than you. Just watch out. So, like I drew and drew and drew until I could like remember how like a tricep looks backwards and forwards and stuff like that. And I think sometimes, it's, like digital tools can be incredibly helpful, but I have noticed a lot of digital artists are relying more and more on painting over models. And there's nothing wrong with that. Reference can be incredibly helpful, but like one day you're not going to have that. And so it's better to commit some of that stuff. The more you can commit to memory, the better is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, listen, technology is an amazing aid to sort of improve efficiencies or increase volume. But what we, at the end of the day, the software we have in our head and the hardware we have in our hands is really what it comes down to. And I remember teaching students in an ad school, and they were really like didn't want to do comps. They just wanted to like, oh, I can just get a picture and write some words on top of a picture. And I'm like, yeah, but a client may not accept that. A client has very specific needs, and you have to fulfill that. And the agency has a sort of a reputation, and you need to be able to execute, or at least communicate to the people who will execute for you. And it just so happened that we had lost power at ad agency, or the design agency I worked for. And we still had to deliver things to clients. So we were doing everything by hand, paste ups and whatever we needed to do, get things done while the power was out. And I said to the student, I'm like, who was sort of complaining, I said, well, what are you going to do if the power goes out? Like, you don't get to go home. Like the client still expects whatever they, have paid for. So yeah, I mean, and I'm like you, man, I've seen a lot of people relying on, photo reference for getting things done, which I think has an amazingly cool vibe to it. But it's like, it makes you dependent upon something. And that's always a little bit of concern for me on anything that I do. Like, I don't want to be dependent on some sort of exterior force or power for me to be able to achieve what I want to do.
Yeah. I think you become reliant on it. And then, especially if you're in comic books, you have to you're not just doing one illustration, you're doing dozens of illustrations. Sometimes hundreds of illustrations. It depends how many characters are in the book. If you count each character as an illustration, characters interacting with each other, et cetera, like, you're not going to be able to find every single pose you need. And I've seen some digital artists where it's like, okay, I'm going to have to fake it here and there. And it becomes glaringly obvious that they are not proficient at anatomy. And those things immediately take readers out. At least it takes me out. I don't know how young readers feel anymore. When I was growing up, my favorite video was, or instructional video was when Jim Lee was drawing for Stan Lee. I don't know if you ever saw that video. Yeah, like whenever
I remember when it happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I owned it on VHS. I watched it over and over and over again. And he gave this wonderful advice. Like, the next time you're in a dentist, I'm paraphrasing, the next time you're in a dentist's office, take a look around, because that's not the easiest reference to find. Just try to remember what it kind of feels like and kind of looks like. So the next time you have to draw it, you can at least kind of fake it, and then go to photo reference to kind of fill it in a little bit. Yeah. If you start with photo reference, I just think that like your mind has almost this rigid idea of what the setting should look like, versus if it came secondhand, it was just kind of like, well, let me just trust my instincts about how Yeah, you like if you ask any artist who's just off the street, like, hey, can you draw? Like, yes. Can you draw me a dentist's office? They know there's that long chair. They know there's that circular light. They know there's
Hmm.
probably like a light box on the wall for X-rays. Like, you get the
Right.
general idea, and I think that's incredibly important to have. Like, I think like 75% of what you draw should be from memory. Like, I just think
Yeah.
draw lots of things. Draw them poorly. You don't have to draw them well, but at least draw
Yeah.
them so that you know how to draw them.
There was so real close friend of mine he does like development artwork for video game companies, and he has a daughter who is now in Cal Arts, and she's a phenomenal artist, like ridiculously good. And he told me, he's like he told her the only advice he really gave her was, for every one thing you draw for yourself, of like from your own fanciful, invention, draw 10 things from reality. And I thought, like, yeah, like that's filling up that morgue of information in your brain that you can pull from to manipulate when the time comes on the piece of paper or the digital, tool, whatever it is.
Yeah,
No.
you're just expanding the tools in your toolbox. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what I'm just stealing from Stephen King, because that was in his memoir. Like, just every creator is just refining the tools in their toolbox, just because you're gonna have to go there again. And like, I think when I first started trying to make my own comics when I was in my 20s, like, not only did I lack the experience and probably a little bit of the discipline, but it's just like I wasn't ready for some of the ambition that I had. I wasn't ready to fulfill it. And now, like, now that I'm 40, if I'm thinking of a project, I have 20 years of experience in terms of like, okay, I know what I can do. I know what I'm capable of. I know how much coffee I can drink before it burns a hole in my stomach, to stay up late and work long nights. And I know how many pages I can realistically get done in a week for it to look good. And now, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
with the kid, I have to factor the kid being a stay-at-home dad too. So I need, like, it's just, those are just tools, like learning how to manage your own time and learning how to manage. Okay, this is what I can draw well. This is what I can hide a little bit, and this is what I can shine a spotlight on. Like, I think, especially with my commissions, like, one of the things I think I do well is like good figure work, and I could do good cross hatching. So
Mm-hmm.
if someone comes along and says, orders a Batman commission, I know, like, well, let's say standing on a gargoyle, I can emphasize the gargoyle. I can do some cross
Yeah.
hatching with that. That'll make it look really good. It could be nighttime, and so I can use a lot of black to just kind of hide certain areas, and kind of emphasize like the silhouette of Batman. And so I think that just comes with time and a lot of stubbornness to kind of draw things over and over and over and over again.
Dude, so this made me remember, you said something that made me remember, and I guarantee you're gonna go, of course. So it's maybe you went to a fancy art school as a teenager, but anyway, maybe it still happened. But when you were young and you had to do an art project and you were, a little bit better than the average, student in elementary or middle school, you could really, kind of flash it up with, cross hatching and all sorts of these kind of like what were relatively easy hand skills, at least for me at the time, but they would just totally like show off, like in the classroom. So you would do these things, put your assignment into the art class, and you get a good grade. And everyone's like, wow, because you could put all this work in at a quicker pace than the kids who really don't have that early facility with the drawing, with the eye-hand coordination. So you're just doing like the homework assignment, but like with way more grown-up skills.
Yeah, my high school was very competitive, and there were a lot of good artists, and when I first went there, like, I was the best artist in like my junior high, my elementary school, which is not saying much.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I got to this big fancy art high school, I knew there'd be some competition. And like, my drawing class was surprisingly competitive right freshman year, that like there was a student who really didn't like me. And one time we were on a lunch line, and he actually he went to get my attention, and I said, "Oh, hey, what's up?" And he goes like, he literally just blankly just stated to me like, "You're not the best artist in class, right?" because there was like another good artist, but no, I was better than him. I was better than all of them. But that's beside the point. No, I'm sorry, I was better than all of them in the end. I'm not trying to say I'm the greatest. I'm just saying that I was better than those people. But
Right.
yeah, no, like here's the thing: there were some talented people, and I worked harder to be better than them because it's just like.
Well, so that's the thing. I mean, and so I feel like there's such a, I feel like an outcast so often in the term that I am so bloody competitive. And if there's no one around me, then I have to be competitive with myself. Like I have to outdo whatever the thing that I did before. And so art school was just another, battleground to be competitive on. Like, okay, well, I'm going to out hustle everyone here. I'm going to like do the thing better than other people. And it wasn't, not to say that I was the best, but I was going to, like, no one was going to outwork me. Like that was my attitude through school. So I think it's like, to me, it seems like a good way to go, because otherwise you're complacent. Like that whole phrase of like, oh, I'm pretty happy with that. Like that's never uttered. I've never said that. Like, I just don't think that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's good for my mental health. I'm pretty sure.
No, it's not totally not good for mental health. No.
I'm pretty sure, like, if our parents were a little bit nicer, maybe. But like, yeah, like, unfortunately, that is the way I kind of became. And like I said, like, I had an older brother who I was just hyper competitive with, and that carried over. Like, I'm trying to be better about it. I'm trying to be like I'm still very, very competitive. I'm still trying to get better every day, but I'm trying to not. When I was younger, I would like put other people's work down, maybe not publicly and maybe not, behind someone's back talking to a friend, but in my mind I would. And now I try to look at like the best that like, and I think it's because I have a kid now. And I think it's because over the years I've been asked to tutor students here and there. And the thing I want to see most now from people is just, are you passionate and are you putting your best foot forward? That's it. Like, you don't have to be Mobius. You don't have to be Jack Kirby or Julian Tamaki or anyone. Like, you just, like, can I see love shining through that page? That doesn't have to be perfect, but do you love it? But yeah, in high school, I was very, so senior year, this is a fancy, I won this little fancy award for draftsmanship. And then my art history teacher basically in class, I think I said something snide, and then she just kind of like jokingly said, well, Ethan, that's because you're the best draftsman in school. And I heard another student in the back of the auditorium just go like, hey. And so like there was that part of me that I was like, oh, I got them. I got them all. Now they know. Nobody effing know who's the best.
I love it. So you went from LaGuardia, you went to SVA. So, but you said you were only there for a year. Was that by choice or by circumstance?
A little bit of both. I couldn't, even though I got like some financial aid, it was really hard for me to like afford. It was always hard for me to afford art supplies. I always had to like either borrow some and like, not that I'm proud to say this, but I had to steal a lot when I was in high school, like a Pearl Paint, just because you've been to Pearl Paint, I'm assuming, right?
I'm neither confirming or denying any theft of art supplies of any sort in my time in New York City.
Yeah, Pearl Paint is gone now, as I can admit this, but like, oh my God, it was so easy to steal if you were careful. Oh, yeah. Because you had to pay for everything on each floor was managed differently. So I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. Like when I first went there, I didn't realize you had to pay for supplies on their respective floors. So I was just going floor to floor with like a bag of art supplies. And that's when I realized like, oh, I could have just walked out with this. Pearl Paint wasn't a giant corporation, so I don't feel like I don't feel good about it. Like, I don't care if someone steals from like Walmart, like, screw them. But like but yeah, like I couldn't really afford it. And then when I went to SVA, everything kind of the clock kind of reset in terms of like the courses they were giving us, and these are courses I had already taken. And
that's the first thing I thought of. Yep.
Yeah, and then like the professors are fine. Some of them were a little bit condescending, and others were just a little, and others kind of recognized that, oh, you're really good. And once again, I was just really stubborn, and I was so stubborn and competitive that I just kind of felt like, well, this is not for me. I think I know more than other people, so I'm going to leave. And I put together a portfolio, and Jim Lee, who is one of my favorite artists, I think you can probably tell, it was after 9/11. He had done a piece in the 9/11 memorial book, and he had also just done the Wonder Woman book with Stan Lee.
Yep.
He was going to be at a big Apple Con, and I had these big dreams. I was like, oh, I'm showing my work. I'm going to get hired right away. It's destiny. I showed him my work, and he said some really nice things about my work because I was only 19. He's like, you're really good for a 19-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And then I went outside and I cried because I was like, I built up all this expectation in my brain that I was just like, oh man, like this is it. This is the story I'm going to tell my grandkids one day. But instead, it was just like, no, you're good. Get out of here because there's a long line to see Jim Lee.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh man. Yeah. No, I had that at 15. I went to DC at 15 years old thinking this is it. Like I'm going to roll back into high school, and say, see you later, that kind of attitude. But, yeah. And when it's funny when you were saying when going to SVA, the first thing that flashed in my head was like, well, first year at SVA is all foundational stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody who's really formed in their head of where they are and what they want to do, it's super hard going into that school and not being able to do the things that you want to do.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing you weren't in the dorms. So you were, yeah. So, I mean, that sort of made it a little easier for me because I was around all the other students in the school and the ones who were doing all the cartooning stuff. So I could hang out with them and we could talk comic books and all that kind of stuff. So at least it sort of was a slight fix for my urge. Yeah. Yeah, I get it, dude. I mean, I can see that. So it's a struggle, like it's a struggle and Jim Lee, says next, what does a 19-year-old Ethan do at that point?
Too embarrassed to show my face back at school. That's for sure. I was kind of a dick. I can curse on this podcast, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right.
By all means.
No, I was a little bit of a jerk. And looking back, I think if I had become successful at a young age, it would have completely ruined me. Probably like not only in my artistic like progress, but also just as a person. I just don't think that like, especially now that I'm older and hopefully a little bit wiser, like I think when you see people who, and I won't name names, but when you see people who get really successful at an early age and are surrounded by yes people a lot, I think it stunts their emotional growth more than anything in terms of like what they feel they're owed and what they feel like they're entitled to, especially within this industry that, once again, everyone within this comic book industry feels they have like some kind of personal stake and ownership in it. And so like now all of a sudden, like I've met people who some of them I'm fond of and some of them I'm not, who found success early. And I just feel that like they react to setbacks like children. And because I've had my fair share of setbacks and some successes throughout 20, 30 years. Oh my God, has it been that long? No, the 20 years. Okay, I'm aging myself up too much.
Yeah, 20-ish years. There you
go. I can handle setbacks better now. Like, you devote, like, let's say you devote like 2 to 3 years doing a graphic novel. And let's just say, in the back of your mind, you're a little quixotic about it. And you're like, oh, I hope this sells enough to make me to get me on the indie bestseller book list or even the New York Times book list. I hope it gets this award, that accolade, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the time stuff like that doesn't happen. Like I've met people, like adults older than me, who when that doesn't happen, they tend to blame. They tend to start to play the blame game. They tend to go, oh, my work's better than that guy. My work's better than that person. How come I'm fuck that person. Like that person doesn't deserve that. And it's just like, I might get like that every now and then, but like nowadays it's like, all right, I put 2 to 3 years into the Dragon Path. It sold okay. Some people love it. Didn't win any awards. Didn't get like that much notoriety outside of just within the middle grade space. But it's just like, I have to move on. I would have been much more bummed out in my 20s because you put so much of your own personal investment into 2 to 3 years of work that you want to see that flourish beyond just one graphic novel. But now that I'm 40, I'm just like, okay, I really like this book. I'm very proud of it because I didn't skimp on any of the labor that was involved in it. I put my best foot forward. It found a small audience, but not one that was large enough to warrant the amount of additional stories I want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can be proud of that, but I can also be realistic and say, hey, it's time to kind of move on, because realistically, I cannot do 2 to 3 more Dragon Path books for a small publishing advance. Like, that's just simply is not doable when you have a mortgage and a kid now. Then like I said, when I was a kind of jerky 25-year-old, I would have been like, no, this is my legacy on the line. My art has a higher calling. All this stuff that as a young artist, you tell yourself.
Yeah. And the other thing is, when you're younger, the percentage of time spent is much higher in the total. So if you're 24 and you do this from 24 to 27, well, that's a large percentage of your life versus being 37 to 40. Like that you can go, well, okay, I can learn from that, move on. But the other one is like, hey man, that was a huge chunk of my life. And I think we have this, it's like dating. The breakup, it's like, you're heartbroken, and there's a lot of recovery time, because the percentage when you're 16 years old or 18 years old or 20 years old of that time is significant. Yeah, the thing is that, it's publishing, man. Like, it's a back catalog. So you don't know if the next thing or the thing after that's going to be the one that everyone just loves. And that creates pressure on publishers to put the older thing back out there, because now there's this whole new audience that says, I got to have everything this person does. Well, then everybody benefits in the long run. So the good thing is just, you can always move on and always do the best work you can do. And eventually something will strike. It's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah. I adapted the 39 Clues for Scholastic. That was my last publishing gig. It's set to come out this April. Like, I think a lot of people involved are assuming it's going to sell well just because of Rick Roydian's involvement as kind of like the figurehead. Like not the figurehead. That implies he didn't do anything. He wrote the original book. He's more like, not mascot, because that's insulting. Like, he's just
the inspiration,
the emeritus, like, because they're still putting his name.
I like that.
They're still putting his name up front, kind of like Stanley introduces, basically. Like emeritus of the series, because he wrote the first novel back in 2008, and it had a huge following. So I think that book is going to, send a lot of middle grade and early readers to the Dragon Path, just because Scholastic has both those books. If that ever evolves into something where I can do another Dragon Path book, I think I think money will be a big deciding factor, simply because I threw out the word mortgage before. I'll throw it out again. Mortgages are just something you have to deal with now.
It's I mean, the amount of work that you you were kind and you shared a couple of the books with me, and the Dragon Path was one of them. And I remarked aloud reading it, like, there's no blank panel. Like, he is not leaving a panel sort of like, okay, well, this is just going to be color in the background. No, like, you would texturize the air if you needed to make the panel have compositional strength and weight and, vibe. So the amount of work that you put into every single page of that book is super high. So it shows. Now, your audience does not appreciate that, because they're tiny. They're not looking at that and going like, man, this guy is not putting in 5-hour days, but it's totally there. So I mean, and you're going to, like, the audience will find it. It will find it in time. And fortunately, in the same publishing house, that makes it a lot easier when it comes to reprinting.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I'm glad you noticed that, just because I didn't want to make it look jammed, but I didn't want to make it look empty. I wanted every panel to kind of have a purpose
Yeah.
individually. Like I didn't want to feel like the reader was being cheated in any way. So as someone who I think you could probably tell from talking to me is incredibly self-conscious, I read a lot of Goodreads reviews, and that's always a hellhole because like I hate, like the worst is when someone is reviewing a comic book but doesn't not only clearly doesn't appreciate comics but doesn't understand like the lexicon, and they'll say something like oh, the graphics were okay, and I'm like that
Graphix, nice.
yeah, so you've seen that too, right? And it's just like it's hard to be insulted by someone who gets the terminology that wrong, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mean, is it a fault of the medium in the sense that they call it a graphic novel, so they're just automatically utilizing that term and applying it to the graphical imagery on there? I don't know.
I do think that I think sometimes the layman reader doesn't want to say drawing because that sounds like childish, I guess. And
yeah, it sounds derivative, and
yeah,
I get that.
And I think like sometimes people just want to try to sound a little bit smarter. No, I mean every reader is entitled to their opinion, but I think that sometimes readers, and especially people who are trying to make a social media presence out of being a reviewer, I think sometimes, they're kind of, and I just think that the point, like, and obviously as a creator, I sound like I'm being bitter, which I am. But, like, I do think that sometimes a critic needs to judge a certain piece of work by what it's trying to accomplish, not what you liked or didn't really like about it. Like, you don't judge let's say like a Hong Kong kung fu film the same way you would judge like a Wes Anderson movie, just because they're trying to accomplish different things. Like growing up, I loved like Roger Ebert and Siskel, just because they kind of talked about movies in a way that kind of made it really accessible for someone who didn't go to film school. And like, I remember like I read, back when Ebert was alive, God rest his soul, but like he wrote really funny reviews, scathing reviews, beautiful reviews, but he also just wrote reviews I think that had cinephiles like confused, because he gave like 3 stars to Garfield, and people were like, I used to read his little like question and answer column, and people were like giving him so much shit about it, like how in the world can you give this movie 3 stars? And he's like, I'm giving it 3 stars because it accomplishes what, like, I'm comparing to other films like Garfield. I'm not comparing it to The Godfather.
Yeah, it's exactly. There isn't just one. There's not just one bar that everything's measured on. So because it would be like, well, we're judging Barney against The Wire. Like you don't like it doesn't work like that. Like you have to judge things in relationship to the common comparable. And it's funny, even when you were describing it, going from reading the reviews, there is a conflation between reviewing and critiquing. They are not the same thing. Reviewing is taking something and saying, hey, here's what this is. It is not about you. This isn't about you and what you like. And I also feel very much in the same that you do about critiquing. It isn't about you either. It's about trying to understand what the intent of the creator's effort is and putting it in context with the world and the other works in the like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I appreciated that, you said that you see the effort behind the work, because like I just think that, like, especially with the kind of graphic novels I make, the comics I make, like the drawing is part of the storytelling. Like the drawing, like I'm trying to say things with the drawing because I'm trying to create a world that looks like a lived-in experience, that feels like that feels tactile, that feels tangible, that you can touch it. Like, because a lot of times, I think I kind of said this before, like I feel that a lot of comic books these days, at least from what I see, can be a little flat sometimes. Like they can be really nice drawings individually, like lots of elements are really beautifully drawn, but everything feels like it's like flat maybe is a little bit too harsh, but like I see more effort than love. And sometimes. And even though I just said that I like that you noticed the effort I put in, but I also I want to feel I want people to kind of look at it and just kind of feel like they can step into that world.
Right.
It was like when I started the Dragon Path, like it opens with these big vehicles, and like I hate drawing vehicles, but I was like, you know what? If I was a kid, I would love to see this right now. I would love to see something almost that's physically impossible, but can exist within a page like this and feels real to me. I realized I just insulted a whole generation of new artists, so I apologize for that too.
No, I think, and I don't. I mean, this could be a separate, a completely separate conversation in the whole show, and it's right in its own right. That, and I don't know what the distinction is, because I firmly believe that we are in a golden age of the comic book medium. Like, I think the level of quality that is produced on a monthly basis is higher than it's ever been. But I also feel that there's a lot of work being done that is relying upon whatever technological advancement there is to make it look the way it is. And when I say that, I mean, I don't see a lot of artwork with a lot of weight into it. Not a lot of people are putting a lot of black into their work. So you don't see figures with shadow and backgrounds of shadow, because we have this amazing technology at our hands with Photoshop for coloring that can create these really beautiful and lush pieces, but it doesn't have the same sort of sense of weight when there's this consciousness of the penciler illustrator putting down black. And so like, why does the world look at Kevin Nolan and Mike Mignola with these giant glassy eyes? Is because, well, these guys are so good at putting weight into artwork. And I'm just using them as extreme examples because most people don't get that far into it. So,
no, I completely agree with you there. Yeah, because like, it feels. Here's how I would put it. Like, sometimes I'll see like a beautiful drawing of like DC superheroes and stuff, but it doesn't even feel like they're remotely inhabiting the same space. There's lots of individually well drawn characters, and they're arranged almost as if it's a collage. And it's not like the way, like, yeah, obviously, like I said, I'm gonna pull up one of the greatest, Jose Garcia Lopez. Like when he drew,
my head was no, you took the words out of my head.
It was like, I guess someone can say like, oh, well, isn't that the same thing that he did? And I was like, well, yes, but like those characters felt like they were occupying the same space because their poses are balancing each other out. Whereas like nowadays, like you said, with Photoshop, you can basically work your way around bad compositions. Like, there's that old saying, like when I first started, like there was a saying that like this was the biggest piece of advice, which is, if I can't follow your story without reading it, then the storytelling is bad.
Sure.
Like I should be able to follow what's happening without having to read the word bubbles. And it's just like, and does the art pass the squint test? Like, can you just make out what it is by squinting? And unfortunately, like I see a lot of art nowadays that like, although it's well done and it's done with care, it's not passing these other, I guess you could say arbitrary, but what I think are pretty necessary litmus tests on whether or not it's good storytelling.
And you're going back to your teacher example from high school, and I'm going back to Joe Orlando. Like there's this criteria, and some may say it's arbitrary, some may say it's how it is. And you go, is it making it there? And I have a hard time, like, it doesn't have to all look like, and I'm just going to use Art Adams as an example. It doesn't have to all look like Art Adams. It can look like anything. I mean, I think, looking at Dragon Path, you went down the hardest road possible by doing a illustrative comic book style for a middle grade book, where so many of your sort of peer group of people producing middle grade, they do very much reduced style of artwork to tell the same story. And I think about that, because my work has always been very detailed and very sort of traditionally formed. I go, oh, I envy anybody who can kind of have a nice loose style or very, animated style, because it's, and not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it doesn't require 50,000 lines per page. You can kind of make shapes. And I looked at the book. I'm like, man, he's put so much work into this for that market. Meanwhile, like Nanjing, I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
Nanjing. Yeah. Like, I mean, that work is absolutely like spot on appropriate in that market, like what you're trying to relay there. Does that make sense to you? Like,
yeah.
You went like double time on the Dragon Path, which I'm like, whew, that guy's got some.
Yeah, I think at the time I had this like romantic sense that it was going to be my last graphic novel. I think I was just like, oh, if this doesn't hit, I'm just gonna leave. And then the Marvel job came along. I was like, well, I'm leaving anyway.
Right.
But comics always pulls me back in because I hate myself. So I'm going to torment myself for the rest of this year when I'm done with my commission list.
I mean, so like I got out of business at the millennia, but I stepped my toe back in 3 different times because I don't think you can really truly stop loving your first love. Like, it's just one of those things. You're like, well, this seems like an interesting or fun thing, or I want to do this. And you kind of dip your toe back in and say, okay, I'll do it. And then often it upsets you, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to be very cautious about how I approach comic books again, because I know that I want to produce it all myself, like, and self-publish it as well for the most part. Mm-hmm. Now, whether or not it gets collected elsewhere is a different story. But I just know that, like, I don't want an idea I have to be churned through the kind of traditional editorial process where it becomes something different entirely because it might sell better. Like, if something I make is a little esoteric, I would prefer it stay that way. Which sounds, I know I'm stubborn, so I know I can't change anyone else's mind right now. But yeah, I just know that, like, the next thing I do, it has to be something that I truly love doing. Otherwise, I'm just going to either resent it while I'm finishing it or give up on it. And I don't want to do any of those two things. I want whatever I'm doing to be as fulfilling as possible while I'm doing it. Because even sometimes, like, when I open a commission list and it's really fun, and I'm very fortunate that the money's been good with my commission list. Like, I feel there are times when I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? Why did I leave it open for that long? Like, because I feel bad when a customer and a buyer has to wait a little bit longer.
Right. Right.
Because, the reality is, it's like some of these commissions, it's like you could pay your rent with that money, and you're giving it to me to basically draw on a piece of paper. So I want to make sure not only do you get your art on time, but you get the best that I can produce for that money.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, yeah, and I mean that's a strange thing, because there is a difference between, like, my wife is an artist and she's had to do commission work. So, like, but not like a portrait, but in the terms of like installation artwork, she does a sculptor, and and I see her struggle with that, because most of her work is what she's creating for herself, and she's solving these sort of internal, problems or questions in her work. But when it's like, hey, we need you to do this hotel lobby, like, there's initial development stage, which is exciting. And then it's a sort of this production aspect of it, which she finds herself going like, ugh. And in my design work, it's the same thing. Like, I love the development end of it. It's just this sort of like middle area where I go, oh boy, like, I got to deal with all this client issues and blah, 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 blah. So I get that on the commission end, because it's not specifically your creation, and it is not something you're putting out there in the market with that excitement level. So like if like Marvel said, hey, we want you to draw this 4 issues of the X-Men, you'll be like, you're excited because you get to draw the X-Men. So that's going to be kind of cool. So it's a different kind of mental game that you have to play.
Yeah, but at the same time, like you said earlier at the top of the podcast, or at the top of this interview, sorry, like the commission game has changed so much now, and I think, yeah, a lot of artists are just because, you know, I know I've spent the better chunk of the last 15 minutes criticizing modern artists, but I do think, yes, there are a lot of talented folks out there, and like I think there's only so many comic projects and availabilities to go around that, like, now we have a lot of talented artists who I think are not only making a really good amount of money from their commission list, but like like a pretty sizable amount of their yearly income from it. And I think, yeah, obviously social media helps with that, but it's just like, it's reaching that level of like that, finding that balance. How accessible am I to people? How fast can I do these commissions? And what is the level of quality I can provide for each commission with the time frame that I have? Mm-hmm. So that's what I spent like the better part of 2 years and during the pandemic to kind of like figure out, like, all right, if I really want to do this and I really want to like charge more money for it down the line, like how good do they have to be? And I found that like, I have to basically put my best foot forward. So that's why I only open commission lists when I have like a big chunk of time that I can devote to them, and yeah, just kind of do the best that I can.
Well, I think the standard, and I'm going to use the gold standard again as, Adam Hughes. Like Adam is the gold standard when it comes to commissions, and everybody else has to look and go, okay, well, if you're going to get anywhere in that neighborhood, you have to produce something that is so unique, so beautiful, so captivating that people are going to be willing to say, yes, I want to make this exchange. And there are people doing it. There are plenty of people out there doing work, on par with what Adam does, but he created the model. The world has now sort of changed and following his lead.
Yeah. And then it's also this kind of like if you're Art Adams, like, and I'm lucky enough, I have some original Art Adams art from Monkey Man and O'Brien, but like, there's also the, what's the term I'm looking for? Like the old statesman, kind of like, he's been around for a while.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the austere of it, and that comes with a higher price tag as well. So yeah, I think that's why last year I was like, so when I was working for Disney, I was like, all right, I'm allowed to do non-Marvel fan art in the meantime. And so that's when I started toying around with like, well, what if I do a double page spread? Would anyone be interested in that?
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of, like, there are people who do large commissions, but not as many as you would think. And so like, okay, I can try to plant my flag here. Like, all right, who wants a double page spread? And I'm fortunate that only 3 people ordered double page spreads this commission list, because I don't know how much more my back can really take, just because. So it's like, okay, that's a good amount, and when they're done, I can show them off a little bit. But like, yeah, I think if it was any more than like 5, I would have really regretted it, just because of preparing all of that. It's the physical, like, now that I'm 40, it's the physical toll. Like, that's the one thing I miss about being 25. It's like, I can just torment my body. I'll be like, this is all future Ethan's problem. Like, I'm going to stay up all night, eat garbage, drink tons of coffee. But now it's like, nope, I have to go to bed sometime.
Hunched over a drawing table. I mean, I remember I had a moment of panic in the 90s. I felt like my eyesight was going, and I went to an eye doctor, and he tested me. He's like, yeah, your eyesight's totally perfect. He goes, but what you're doing is you're just overtaxing your close focus. So he's like, every hour, just take a 5-minute break and look out the window, and just for a few minutes, just look out the window, let your eyes relax. And that did the trick. But, yeah, man, the shoulders, the back, the neck, the hands, that they take a beating after time.
I'm actually lucky that my hands have gotten better, just because I switched over from like a nib and brush to like using mainly a calligraphy pen. because that kind of gets the same big strokes that I need. I think without that pen that I discovered, because I spent years looking for the perfect calligraphy pen that had the right flow, that had the right that had the right like durability. And yeah, it's allowed me to produce a lot and save on hand cramps and stuff like that.
That's
but like
good.
the shoulders and back, unfortunately, every now and then I know that like, all right, it's been several weeks since the last time my back acted up. I know it's coming up now. Things like that. I'm glad you mentioned the eyesight thing because it's been happening to me too lately. Sometimes I worry it's just gonna go, but I do think it's just because I'm just staring at this white piece of paper and it's just staring back at me, and it's just hurting my eyes.
Well, I wear readers to be able to see you rather than see a fuzzy version of you on the screen, and I did not have to have any eye support until I think I was like 52, maybe 51, and it was at that point I'm like, I would notice I was holding the book further and further away from me when I'm reading at night, and then but now it's just like I can't really read anything that's within arm's distance without wearing readers now, and it's just such a drag. It sucks.
Wait, if you don't mind when I ask you, how old are you now?
I'm 55.
Okay.
I'll be 56 at the end of the year. Yeah.
You look good for your age.
Thanks.
But you look good. Without the white, it's just the white beard gives it away. But like I wouldn't. Okay. Without that, I wouldn't have guessed in your 50s.
I'm also gonna not be too touchy here, but I'm gonna be touchy. When I had hair and I was a absolute white-headed blonde, like my hair is so pale and blonde that my beard has always looked like this. I had a little bit of red in it because I have redheads in my family, but yeah. So, but yeah, if I shave, I look much younger.
Yeah, I would imagine.
And a little pudgier. Okay, let's talk about Art Adams. I don't mind talking about Arthur. I'll give you my little Art Adams rundown, and then I want to hear how your whole thing goes. So I discovered the first bit of Art Adams artwork I saw, what I didn't know what it was. Like, I think he had done a cover for something and he just signed it Adams. And I thought like, does Neil Adams have a kid? Like, that was my mind. Like, I didn't know. He does. And then Long Shot came out. I was in high school. So I was like, peak comic buying, nerddom age. I was just so into comics. And this thing came out and it blew my mind. Like, I hadn't felt that sort of taken away and engaged into a new comic book since the Micronauts came out. Now, I loved my Daredevil runs. I loved my X-Men runs. I loved all the Moon Knight and the New Mutants, all those things with all those amazing artists, but the thing was, they had existed before. These were new. And when Long Shot came out, I was just blown away. I'm like, this is the guy, and, then he did those strings with the New Mutants and the X-Men annuals and all that kind of stuff. And it was a, glorious time for me, especially as someone really focusing at that point, saying, I want to get into comic books. So Arthur was a real big kind of, encouragement factor. And I remember going to the Creation comic book shows back in the Roosevelt Hotel, right next to Grand Central Terminal Station. And he was one of the guests. So this is like 1985, maybe 86. And I was just blown away. Like, this is the dude. So how did you discover Arthur's work?
So growing up, my brother was 9 years older, and he gave me, I remember like a lot of my comics were just stuff that like was left over from his collection.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot of complete runs. And I don't know exactly when the first time I saw Art Adams was. But I do remember the first Art Adams comic that really grabbed me. And I think it was X-Men Annual number 12 with the High Evolutionary. And it has the backstory with the X-Babies that ends up leading to the Excalibur Annual.
Yep.
And then like, that was when his style was starting to like really crystallize. Like his chins got a little bit bigger and things got a little boxier. And I remember like just being in love with the X-Babies. Like I loved the way he drew Little Wolverine. I loved the way he drew Mojo. Like I couldn't. I mean, obviously Mojo is probably a little problematic. That's because it is kind of like, oh, look, he's fat. That's why he's grotesque. And it's like, you definitely would not design Mojo today. But like just the way he was like drawn, like I'd never seen a villain drawn that way. I'd never seen designs like that on a page, and it just completely blew my mind. And then when I got a little bit older in junior high, I was collecting like I think what also kind of drew me to Art Adams even more was because a lot of the other artists I love, like Joe Madureira and J. Scott Campbell at the time, and like Ed McGuinness and all those guys, were all just people who learned from Art Adams. Like,
totally.
He's quietly like one of the 10 most influential comic book artists in North America, and basically from there I was like, all right, I got to track down all his X-Men annuals. And then there was that New Mutants one he did right before annual number 9, I believe. The New Mutants special leads into X-Men annual number 9 with Storm. And then I was like, all right, I gotta get his Gumby. And then his new Fantastic Four, that 3-issue arc was fantastic. And yeah, basically, and then like Monkey Man and O'Brien came out, and that blew my mind. So basically, like, I just went around just hunting down everything he did. The Action Comics number 1 annual post Crisis.
Yeah, I love that thing.
With Batman and the Vampire.
It was Giordano inking, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I thought was, I think it's Giordano. Anyway, I mean, I loved those inks on there because it felt so different
than Terry
everything
Austin.
else. Yeah, I was just like, oh, this is so kind of cool because it didn't feel as sort of like, pixelated as Terry's inks could be on somebody. Like there was this kind of cool weight.
Yeah, so it was it was Adams and Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane. It's like I want to draw like these 3 people. And then like as I got a little older, I also like every other kid loved Dragon Ball. So like Akira Toriyama's art became influential. But yeah, like it always goes back to Adams in terms of like when Adams was I think the art style that kind of like revealed to me that like, oh, you can leave your mark on art. Like but before that, when I was a kid, it's like all comic book art was impressive to me because I didn't know how anything was done.
Right.
Like I knew Neil Adams. Like I had some reprints of like Green Arrow, Green Lantern that had a coffee stain on it, and I just loved it because it was a comic book and I could tell it was somewhat realistic. Like Art Adams, his style I think just spoke to a lot of young people because it's like it's the art that's meeting us on our level, and then
it was a big change. So I'll move the dial back, a few years to what inspired Art's work, which was Michael Golden's work. Like where I think without Michael's sort of, we don't get what we call Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man webs. Those are Michael's webs, and what Todd and what Arthur, all these guys kind of pulled, like they in the 80s were able to, I think just because of the decade itself was a very sort of kind of colorful decade. I think there was this kind of vibe that was happening, and we had seen people like Frank Miller really kind of change what his style was from the Daredevil stuff to going on to Ronin and then going into the Dark Knight Returns, seeing Bill Sienkiewicz evolve into what he became. I think there was this kind of like, I think that awakening, like where you can kind of put your mark on the world, I think really kind of came, and Arthur did the same thing. He's like, here's what I love, but I want to make it look like this. I want to make it look cartoony or whatever the thing was that he was kind of saying he wanted to do in his head. And then, Jim, I think Jim loved Arthur, but Jim also loved, John Byrne. And he did this amazing fusion of John Byrne and, Art Adams, and sort of created like a perfect comic book look, and, it was a really kind of cool time. It's cool. I love thinking of that, how that evolution works. And yeah, I mean, God, I mean, yeah, I would love to see Arthur do more work. I'd love to see more storytelling from him.
Yeah, I remember the last thing I collected from him that wasn't just covers, because he did like I think like 10 years ago he did a big run of kaiju covers for IDW.
Yep.
So I
Yeah.
got all of those. But I remember he would just do the Jonah Future shorts in the Tom Strong anthology series. And I remember at the time, like, I this is great. I can get like a few pages of Art Adams every month. This is all I need.
A little fix, get a little bit of fix. Yeah. It's so, it's so funny. And like, I'll tell you, and this is the weird competitive thing in my head that I hope you'll appreciate. Huge Art Adams fan. Like, loved this guy, was my, was my sort of high school hero. And I was penciling a book for Dark Horse, and it was issue number 1. And I'm like, all right, cool. And then I get a call from the editor saying, hey, yeah, this is that and the other thing. And hey, and we're getting Art Adams to do the cover.
Oh,
and I was
sweet.
like, no, I'm like, fuck. Cause all I wanted to do was do the cover for my own comic book. I was so annoyed. Like I couldn't like channel my inner 15-year-old to say like, dude, Art Adams is doing the cover for your comic. It was a few years later. I was like, what was I thinking? Of course it was a great idea. Yeah. So that was me being competitive.
Only natural though. Which is
only natural.
Like we said, it's a good thing to be competitive so long as we have some distance from it and we can kind of reflect on it, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, and be nicer people in the long run at the end. Stop being overtly competitive. That's always a good thing, unless you need to be, because they're asking for it.
I suppose sometimes, yeah. Nowadays, I would like to think the work speaks for itself, but every now and then it's like, no, I gotta flex a little bit here now.
Well, I mean, honestly, that might be the reason that, like I said, I reached out to you, because I'm like, because the work that you're putting up, I'm like, this is like, they're the flexes. I mean, they're these really beautiful pieces of artwork, and I'm like, this guy's got like, you just had a very, like I said, you were infusing these things that I thought was a really thoughtful approach to creating action superhero, commission artwork. And I thought, like, oh, that's just kind of a cool approach. So being thoughtful, let's talk about what I think is an incredibly thoughtful work, which is Nanjing.
Oh, okay.
Like, what's the evolution of this? How did this come around for you?
Well, so at the time I had finished high school, the Japanese occupation of the Republic of China was always something that, like, I at least kind of casually knew about just because of my family. They immigrated here from China and then had me. And there was like, there was a lot of animosity towards Japan from my parents. It's because, and I don't know if you've ever seen, like, have you ever seen the show Kim's Convenience about the Korean,
Yes.
The father has a lot of animosity towards China. I mean, not China, maybe China, but also Japan.
Right.
And it's just something that, like, is like a casual thing amongst a lot of us, a lot of Asian Americans of this generation. Just like, oh yeah, our parents came from were born right after World War II, and so that is their milieu, that is the setting for how they view world politics on the Pacific. So, I was, when I first learned about it, I think I felt a sense of, like, almost like a nationalistic duty to do something about it. And I was like 18. I was a stupid kid. I had read, The Rape of Nanjing by Iris Chang, who passed away. And I read a few other, like, shorter history books that mentioned it. And in my 20s, I thought I was ready to do that book. And I really was not ready to do that book at all. So I decided to do a book about my life instead at that time, which was me, my girlfriend, and we started, like, rescuing cats and stuff. And I worked in Humane Society. So when that was done around 2013, my career was a little bit more stable, my freelance career. I didn't really have a lot of, like, proper comic credits to my name. So I just started, like, you know what? I want to revisit Nanjing as a concept. I want to see if I am both thoughtful and skilled enough to basically approach the story now with the kind of care and maturity that it kind of requires. And yeah, I did like 60 pages just all by myself, and I thought about self-publishing it. I had a Diamond account as a self-publisher. I showed it to the person who was in charge of the account at the time, and she gave me some advice. And then I reached out to a friend who knew someone at Dark Horse, and as luck would have it, they were pretty open to kind of looking at the project. And you know, the editor at the time was Jim Gibbons, who became a friend, and yeah, he really liked the project. He championed it, and then I was very fortunate that Dark Horse, you know, took a shot on me. So it all worked out, and the book it did pretty well for you know, for the kind of release that it was. Like, it's only in black and white. It's from someone who is not a big name, and it's, you know, pretty harrowing kind of historical drama and stuff. So yeah, I'm very happy with the way it was received.
Well, so a few things, and let's see if we can figure them all out. Like, one, what did you like? What was your idea heading into it? Like, and how did you like create this storyline for the comic? Because it's a really interesting way of telling it, because you're in the middle of it with these characters versus looking at it from an external point of view. You're not giving this sort of like, here's what's happening and what's moving around. You let the characters say what they know, and they don't know everything. So there's no omniscience in this. This is very, you know, first person. And did anything else inspire you in creating that? Like, were you looking at other works and saying, oh, I like how this is done, or like films or books?
There were a couple of films that were made later on, in between me doing my book and me being 18. They kind of like, you know, made over in China, that kind of like dealt with the tragedy. And you know, I watched it and I was inspired by them, but I also kind of didn't want to be too inspired by them, because I didn't want to end up plagiarizing too much of it. But I did kind of take from it some references of like, oh, well, that's probably how the clothes would have looked, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
But overall, I think when I was first trying to do the project, like especially like in my 20s, I just didn't have experience making books, and so I didn't really know where the best place to start a story was. And I think having characters being thrown right into the situation and throwing the reader into that situation, like media res, I think, you know, that sense of kinetic confusion, I think I used that to kind of masquerade shortcomings in a way. That's kind of like, okay, look, I'm not the greatest historian. I'm not a journalist. I wasn't there. So there's things I don't know. There's things the readers probably don't know. So let's make that the case for everyone here. And that also kind of just heightens the drama right away, because you're immediately just thrown into this scene where, like, you know, you see the captain basically need to find resources right away. They're hiding from the enemy right away. So then within those 8 pages, you know, like, it was just, I just set out to like, all right, I got to make the storytelling really tight so that you're drawn in immediately and you understand what's happening right off the bat. And so the characters themselves were also just kind of like, I was like, okay, what archetypes can I use to kind of make the reader immediately understand what the stakes are? And it's like, all right, here's the lone, he's not really a lone wolf, but he's kind of like the man with no name, because he has no name really. And, you know, he's emotionally reserved. He's headstrong. He's confident, but he's hiding his vulnerability. And I mean, you know, I give him a soldier that he has to care for. A third soldier dies right in the first 20 pages so that you understand the stakes. And then like, you know, all the history books that deal with it, that deal with this tragedy, this incident, talk about how obviously just how mismanaged the auxiliary forces were, how the one exit that all the soldiers kind of went to was compromised, et cetera, et cetera. And so, like, all right, these soldiers are aware they have to go someplace. They're going to try to get there. If you know anything about the history of it, you know they're doomed. And if you don't know anything about the history about it, you fear that they're doomed. So that was basically it. And it's just like, all right, let me try to do the best I can do. As it was a big undertaking at the time, and I felt like, looking back, I'm still surprised I pulled it off without screwing it up too much.
Well, did you? I mean, I'm gonna get. I'm gonna. Here, I'm gonna write down my answer. Okay. Did you? I mean, did you sit down and write a script?
Not really. A lot of times, and this is. I'm sorry. No. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I basically, a lot of times the way I work is I will do layouts and thumbnails. And within that process, important dialogue will be laid out.
Mm-hmm.
Like with the Dragon Path, because it was signed after I finished the first 24 pages when Scholastic signed me, they kind of require a little bit more process to be examined. And so I did the layouts and a PDF of the entire 200-page book. But usually, when the way I used to work was, okay, I have a scene in my head. I know what the big flashpoints of the story are. I know we have point A, point B, and point C. I'm not 100% sure what goes in between those, but I know the emotional heights that these characters need to go through. And then I'll sometimes do some layouts and some, just some write down some dialogue, like, okay, what's exposition, what's character development, and just kind of build around there. And it's a very, I think you could say, like, haphazard way of approaching comic book making. And I think this is also one of the reasons why I mainly just work by myself, just because my process is a little unconventional, and I feel like I'm the only collaborator that understands my process.
Ethan, I think it is not unconventional, because the majority of comic book artists who are also writing their own stories that I talk with predominantly work from thumbnail towards script. Like, there's this, because I think we have a leading edge of telling story visually. So we lay onto that and go, okay, well, this is the easiest way for me to get from point A to point G, and I'll work my way through there visually, and then kind of elbow it and muscle it and kind of grind it out to figure all the little details out. So I don't think it's too far out of the ordinary in that respect, because often you just don't sit down and go, okay, page 1, panel 1. It doesn't really work that way. I mean, you have to outline however you outline, and if it's with drawings, that's how you do it.
That makes me feel a little bit better. I know I'm not the only one then. Yeah.
No. It works.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it works, and more than anything, I think, like, because when I'm doing something, I want to make sure that the set pieces feel right. Like, I think, like, when you think of, like, great movies, for instance, and I sometimes think that the comparison between comics and movies can be fraught, because I think sometimes, especially nowadays, like, people think of comics as a launching pad for movies too much and TV shows. But, like, when you think of a great movie you love, you think of, like, oh, I know a bunch of, I'm thinking of all the great scenes and how it made me feel. And even with comics and books, it's like, oh, I remember in The Dark Knight when he comes back. I remember the mud fight, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to make sure that those big flashpoints ring true. I want to make sure that, like, all right, it's what I'm imagining in my head. Like, I have scenes that I know are required to be there, but now it's my job to make sure that everything in between works. Like, when I was doing the Dragon Path, it's like, I know that when Prince Sing embraces Midnight at the end, the audience has to feel like, oh, they're finally connected. Like, she is family to him now. Like, and now I need to make sure that they, like, and it's pretty generic the way I did it. It was, like, no different than any kind of, like, Pixar thing. Like, just kind of like, you meet, there's a confrontation, try to solve the confrontation, something goes wrong, but you remedy it at the end. Like, it's just, it's like, it's a formula, and it's a tried and true formula. And I was like, all right, there were times, like, when I was doing Dragon Path, I was like, this is 200 pages. I'm tired. My back is going out. Maybe I should just cut out 30 pages. maybe she shouldn't turn evil for those 30 pages. And
Right.
it's just like, she's good the whole time, and they hug. But it's like, no,
Right.
she has to turn bad a little bit for otherwise that ending doesn't mean anything.
You don't earn it. Like it's not earned, and it's just, it's a little handholdy. Yeah. And I mean, I think you did that like with Nanjing, is that you have this protagonist who, not by want, has to take on caring for other people. Like I feel that character would have been far happier on his own, running some sort of counterinsurgency by himself, versus having to take. I mean, and you show examples of, we can't get involved, and people get killed, mere feet away from them, because they're making the choice, which is we're not going to make any difference in what's happening there, and we're only going to get ourselves killed, so we have to move on. And you enrobe your hero, I'm using the term hero, but your protagonist, with this armor, I'm going to call this magic armor. And the magic armor is the coat. And the reason I call it magic is because he lays a magic spell upon it when he describes the coat. So when he gives it to, his underling is now protected, because he feels emotionally like this has a greater sense of value than just a thing to keep me warm. Like it was a very like poignant element, but it also, the protagonist is then giving up his armor.
Yeah.
And that makes him vulnerable.
Him away slowly. Yeah. Like I love it in movies when like a character looks really different in the end than from the beginning. Like,
for sure.
Like
Jack McClane. John McClane.
Yeah. Or like I love, I hope I don't get his name wrong, the director Alexander Payne. Sometimes I get Alexander and Thomas Payne mixed up, and those are two different. But like I love like an election, and Matthew Broderick by the end of the film looks horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
Like his own hubris has done that to him. And the same with like Thomas Hayden Church in Sideways. It's like, yeah, your nose is broken because you deserved it. And like, I love when characters are forced to change from the beginning to the end, because it shows like a real path that they took and a real journey that they went on. Because otherwise it feels like fluff. But I'm also looking at the time, and I'm sorry to say I have to go now. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I got it. So we'll wrap it up. I got so many more things I want to talk about. Thanks for joining me, man. This was absolutely super fun to talk with you. And I really think we could have, if we had all the time, we'd keep talking about other stuff.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Yep. And I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Bye.